Jae-won walked through the crowded streets of Seoul, his shoes making soft sounds against the pavement. The city was busy, with people moving quickly in every direction, carrying bags, talking on phones, and rushing to their destinations. He was different from the others, walking slowly, looking around with careful eyes, observing everything. The autumn wind was cool and crisp, carrying the smell of fallen leaves in distant coffee shops. Jae-won's messenger bag hung loosely on, his shoulder slightly worn but still strong. He worked as a junior researcher at a small historical archive, and today was his day off. But even on his day off, his mind was always searching, always curious about the stories hidden in old documents and forgotten memories. As he turned the corner near Gwanghwamun Square, something unexpected happened. A young woman was walking in the opposite direction, holding a steaming cup of coffee and looking at her phone. Their paths crossed in a moment of pure accident. Jae-won didn't see her, and she wasn't looking up. Suddenly they crashed into each other. The coffee flew into the air, creating a beautiful arc of brown liquid that seemed to move in slow motion before splashing onto the ground. The cup fell and broke into several pieces. The woman jumped back, her eyes wide with surprise and anger. "Oh no," she exclaimed, looking down at her now stained white jacket. Her expensive designer coat was ruined by the coffee. Jae-won immediately felt embarrassed. "I'm so sorry," he said quickly, pulling some tissues from his bag to help her clean up. His hands were shaking slightly, showing how nervous he felt. The woman looked at him, her expression a mix of frustration and surprise. She was beautiful, with sharp eyes and a face that seemed to tell many stories. Her name was Hye-jin, though Jae-won didn't know that yet. "Are you always this clumsy?" she asked, her voice sharp, but not entirely unkind. Jae-won couldn't help but smile. "No, not always, just today, apparently." Something in his honest response made Hye-jin's anger soften. She sighed and started wiping her jacket, realizing that getting angry wouldn't change anything. "I'm Jae-won," he said, offering his hand. "Let me buy you another coffee to replace the one I just destroyed." Hye-jin hesitated for a moment, then accepted. "I'm Hye-jin," she replied, shaking his hand. Her grip was firm, matching her personality. They walked to a nearby coffee shop, an old place with wooden chairs and walls covered in black and white photographs. The coffee shop felt like a small sanctuary in the middle of the busy city. As they sat down, Jae-won noticed something interesting. Hye-jin had a small notebook open on the table. A photograph was partially visible, an old, slightly faded image of a landscape that looked both familiar and mysterious. "Is that a family photo?" Jae-won asked, his researcher's curiosity coming through. Hye-jin quickly covered the notebook. "Just some old memories," she said, her voice becoming slightly guarded. The conversation was awkward, but interesting. They talked about the city, about work, about nothing and everything. Jae-won learned that Hye-jin worked in marketing, that she loved old movies, and that she had a passion for collecting vintage photographs. Outside, the city continued its endless dance. People walked by the coffee shop window, cars moved along the streets, and the autumn wind continued to blow. But inside, something small but significant was happening. Two strangers who would never have met were now sitting together, sharing a moment. When they finally left the coffee shop, both felt that this was more than just a random meeting. Something about their conversation, about the way they looked at each other, suggested that this was just the beginning of something unexpected. Jae-won watched Hye-jin walk away, her damaged jacket a reminder of their strange first encounter. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. The city of Seoul continued around them, unaware of the small story that had just unfolded on its busy streets. A week after their first meeting, Jae-won and Hye-jin found themselves in a small, hidden cafe tucked away in a quiet alley of Seoul. The cafe was different from typical modern coffee shops. It had old wooden tables, faded photographs on the walls, and a sense of history that seemed to whisper stories. Hye-jin arrived first, choosing a corner table near a window. She was wearing a dark blue sweater, her hair pulled back simply. Her notebook, the same one from their first meeting, lay open in front of her. She seemed nervous, her fingers tapping quietly against the table. Jae-won entered a few minutes later carrying a brown leather folder. Their eyes met, and for a moment the cafe seemed to go silent. He sat down, ordered 2 coffees, and looked directly at Hyejin. "You said you wanted to talk," he said simply. Hyejin hesitated. The photograph that had partially fallen from her notebook during their first meeting continued to intrigue Jae-won. It showed an old landscape, mountains in the distance, a small, traditional house, and something that looked like an old pathway. "This photograph," Hyejin began. "It belonged to my grandmother. I've been trying to understand its story for years." Jae-won leaned forward. As a researcher, he knew that every photograph had a secret waiting to be discovered. "May I see it?" he asked. She slid the photograph across the table. Up close, Jae-won noticed small details he hadn't seen before. There was a date stamped on the back, 1953. It was just after the Korean War, a time of great change and difficulty for many families. "My grandmother never talked much about her past," Hyejin explained. "She was always quiet about those years." Jae-won examined the photograph carefully. Something about the landscape seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place why. The mountains in the background, the old house with its traditional roof, it all seemed to tell a story. "Where was this taken?" he asked. Hyejin shrugged. "That's the problem. I don't know. My grandmother would change the subject whenever I asked about it." Their coffees arrived. The cafe owner, an older woman with kind eyes, looked at the photograph briefly. For just a moment, Jae-won thought he saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Families have secrets," the owner said softly, placing their coffees down. "Some secrets are better left unspoken." After she walked away, Jae-won and Hyejin exchanged a look. The comment felt significant, like a hidden message. Jae-won opened his leather folder. Inside were several old documents, research papers, historical records he had collected over years of working in the archive. He began comparing them with the photograph, looking for any small connection. Hours passed. The cafe grew quieter. Outside, the city's sounds became softer as evening approached. They talked, compared notes, shared what little they knew. "My job at the historical archive might help," Jae-won said. "I can research this more deeply." Hyejin watched him. There was something about his careful approach, his genuine interest, that made her trust him. She didn't know why, but she felt this strange connection, like they were meant to uncover something important together. As the cafe prepared to close, they had more questions than answers. The photograph remained a mystery, a small piece of paper that seemed to hold generations of untold stories. "We'll meet again?" Hyejin asked. Jae-won nodded. "We'll solve this together." When they left the cafe, the city was dark. Streetlights created small pools of yellow light. Something had changed between them. What started as a random coffee spill was becoming something much more significant. The photograph sat quietly in Jae-won's folder, waiting to reveal its secrets. The old letter arrived on a rainy Wednesday morning. Jae-won found it buried deep in the archives, tucked between 2 massive historical volumes. The paper was yellow with age, the edges fragile and delicate. His hands trembled slightly as he carefully unfolded the document. The letterhead was faded, but still readable. It was dated 1957, just a few years after the Korean War. The handwriting was beautiful, careful, precise strokes that spoke of education and careful thought. At the research center, Jae-won spread the letter out, examining every detail. Something about the handwriting reminded him of something, but he couldn't quite place it. He knew this letter was important, though he didn't understand why. Meanwhile, Hyejin was working in her marketing office, her mind constantly drifting back to the mysterious photograph. She had been asking her elderly aunt about family history, hoping to find some clues. That evening, they met at a small restaurant near the city center. Jae-won arrived first, the old letter carefully protected in a clear folder. When Hyejin sat down, he immediately pushed the document across the table. "Read this," he said quietly. Hyejin's eyes scanned the letter. At first, nothing seemed special. It was a letter about land, about family, about a difficult time after the war. But then she saw a name that made her stop. The letter mentioned her grandmother's name. "This is impossible," she whispered. Jae-won watched her carefully. "What do you mean?" Hyejin explained that her grandmother had always claimed her family had lost everything during the war, but this letter suggested something different. A piece of land, a hidden connection, something that had been kept secret for decades. The restaurant was quiet. An old television in the corner played soft music. Outside, Seoul's evening traffic created a distant background noise. "My aunt told me something interesting today," Hyejin said. "She mentioned that my grandmother had a brother no one talked about, a brother who disappeared during the war." Jae-won leaned forward. In his work at the historical archive, he had seen many stories of families separated during those difficult years. Families torn apart by war, by political divisions, by circumstances beyond their control. The letter revealed more. It spoke about a piece of land in a small mountain village, a place where two families had been connected through marriage and friendship long before the war changed everything. "Look at this part," Jae-won pointed. There was a description of a landscape, mountains, a small house, exactly like the photograph Hyejin had shown him weeks earlier. They spent hours talking, connecting small pieces of information. Each detail seemed to reveal another mystery, another hidden story. Hyejin's hand touched the letter. "My grandmother never spoke about this," she said softly. "Why would she hide such a story?" Jae-won understood something about human nature. Sometimes people hide stories not out of shame, but out of protection. Protection for themselves, for their families, for memories too painful to remember. As the restaurant began to close, they realized they were close to something big. A family connection that had been hidden for generations was slowly coming to light. "We need to visit the village," Jae-won said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Hyejin agreed. Something was pulling them toward this place, toward understanding a story that had been waiting to be told for decades. When they left the restaurant, the city was quiet. Streetlights created soft shadows. The letter sat between them. A bridge, connecting past and present, a key to unlocking a family's hidden history. Their journey was just beginning. The mountains in the old photograph seemed to be calling them, promising to reveal secrets long kept silent. The mountain village was small and quiet, nestled between green hills that seemed to hold countless secrets. Jae-won and Hyejin arrived. Early in the morning, the mist still hanging low over the ancient houses and narrow streets. They had spent weeks preparing for this trip. Jae-won had collected every possible document from the archive. Hyejin had spoken to her remaining family members, gathering small pieces of information that might help them understand their connection. The first person they met was an old man sitting outside a traditional wooden house. He watched them approach, his eyes sharp and knowing. When Hyejin showed him the photograph, something changed in his expression. "I know this place," he said slowly. "I have lived here my entire life." The old man invited them inside for tea. His home was simple. Wooden floors, careful decorations, walls covered with old photographs. Each picture seemed to tell a story of the village's past. As they sat, the old man began to speak. He told them about the years after the war, about families torn apart, about secrets that people kept to survive. He remembered Hyejin's grandmother and her brother, two young people caught in a time of great confusion and pain. "Your grandmother was brave," he told Hyejin. "She made choices to protect her family, choices that were not easy." Jae-won listened carefully, taking notes. Each word seemed to unlock another piece of the puzzle they had been trying to solve. The photograph began to make sense. It was more than just a picture of a landscape. It was a map of memories, of connections that had been hidden for decades. They spent hours talking. The old man showed them documents, pointed out places in the village that matched the photograph. He explained how families had been connected, how land had been shared, how people had survived the difficult years after the war. By afternoon, they discovered something unexpected. Jaewon's grandfather and Heejin's grandmother had known each other long before the war. They were not just neighbors but friends who had shared a deep connection. There was a promise, the old man said quietly. A promise made during a very difficult time. The village seemed to hold its breath. The mountains in the background watched silently, keepers of stories that had waited to be told. Hyejin found herself emotional. These were not just historical facts. These were the stories of her family, of real people who had lived through incredible challenges. As evening approached, they walked through the village. Each old house, each narrow street seemed to whisper stories. They could almost feel the presence of those who had lived there decades ago. The old man gave them a final piece of information, a location where they might find more documents, an old storage building at the edge of the village, almost forgotten by time. Some secrets are best discovered slowly, he told them. Some truths need time to be understood. When they left his house, the sun was setting. Orange and pink colors painted the mountain landscape. The photograph Hyejin had carried for years now made complete sense. They had uncovered more than just a family story. They had found a connection that crossed generations, that spoke about survival, about love, about the incredible strength of families during difficult times. Jaewon looked at Hyejin. They had started as strangers, a random meeting on a busy Seoul street. Now they were connected by a story larger than themselves. The mountain village watched them leave, holding its secrets close. But some secrets were ready to be told. Some stories were waiting to be understood. Tomorrow they would explore the old storage building. Another piece of the puzzle was waiting to be discovered. The mountains stood silent, keepers of a story that had waited decades to be told. The storage building stood at the edge of the village, its wooden walls weathered by years of sun and rain. Jaewon and Hyejin approached it early in the morning, the mountain air crisp and cold. Snow had begun to fall, tiny white flakes dancing around them like silent witnesses to their journey. The old lock on the door was rusty, but Jaewon managed to open it carefully. Inside, dust-covered boxes and old trunks filled the small space. Shelves lined the walls, holding years of forgotten memories. Heejin found an old wooden box in the corner. It was different from the others, more carefully preserved, with intricate carvings on its sides. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, they discovered a collection of letters, photographs, and a small leather-bound diary. The first page was dated 1950, the beginning of the Korean War. Hyejin recognized her grandmother's handwriting immediately. As they read through the documents, a powerful story began to unfold. The diary revealed a complex tale of love, sacrifice, and family survival. Heejin's grandmother had made incredible choices to protect her family during the most challenging times of Korean history. The most surprising revelation was a connection between their families that went beyond simple friendship. Jaewon's grandfather had helped Hyejin's grandmother during a critical moment in the war, saving her brother's life and protecting her family. "This changes everything," Hyejin whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Outside, the snow continued to fall. The mountain village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for their discovery to be complete. They spent hours reading through the documents. Each letter, each photograph told a piece of a larger story. A story of hope, of survival, of connections that survived beyond war and separation. By afternoon, they had pieced together a remarkable family history. The secrets that had been hidden for generations were now revealed, carefully preserved. In this small storage building, Jaewon found a final letter tucked in the bottom of the box. It was a promise made between their grandparents, a promise of protection, of remembrance, of family. As the day grew darker, they sat together in the storage building. The snow outside created a soft, white world. Everything seemed quiet and peaceful. "We were brought together for a reason," Heejin said softly. Jae-won understood. Their chance meeting, the coffee spill, the photograph, everything had led them to this moment. They were not just uncovering a family history. They were completing a promise made decades ago. The documents told a story of two families connected by more than just friendship. They told a story of survival, of hope, of the incredible strength of people during difficult times. As evening approached, they carefully packed the documents. Each item was a piece of history, a memory to be preserved and remembered. They left the storage building, walking through the snowy village. The mountains watched them, silent and strong. The story they had uncovered was more than just a family history. It was a testament to human resilience. Back in Seoul, they began the process of documenting their discovery. Jae-won would use his skills as a researcher. Hye-jin would help share the story with their families. Something had changed between them. What started as a random meeting had become a deep connection. They had discovered a story that connected their families across generations. The last light of day painted the sky in soft colors. Snow continued to fall, covering the mountain village in a blanket of white. Their journey was complete, but a new beginning was just starting. The photograph that had started everything sat between them, no longer a mystery, but a bridge connecting past and present. Some stories are waiting to be told. Some connections are meant to be discovered. And some beginnings happen in the most unexpected ways.